participants, as I hope you have gotten the highlights of the video. In this video, we have been addressed virtually by high-ranking government officials, including Mr. Dagmoit Mogus, who is the Minister of Transport, Dr. Gradion Timotheus, who is a Minister of Justice, and other state ministers, including Huria Ali, State Minister of Innovation, Mr. Salamait Kasa, who is also State Minister of Communication, Dr. Joseph, Abel Tadela, Mr. Tigist, and all of our participants, I think, deserve a credit for their virtual participation. Thank you. ይሄኛውን ክፍለ ጊዜ የጠዋቱን አጠናቀን ከሰዓት በኋላ በጣም በዝርዝር ጉዳዮችን የምንወያይበት የፓነል ውይይት ክፍለ ጊዜ ይኖረናል። ከተለያየ ፐርስፔክቲቭ ዳይሜንሽን የሚያዩ የተለያዩ አቅራቢዎች የሚያቀርቡት ፓነል ሴሽንም በጣም ጠቃሚ እንደሚሆን ተስፋ እናደርጋለን። ለምሳ ከመውጣታችን በፊት ግን ይሄ የጠዋቱን የላውንቺንግ ወይም ደግሞ ሴሬሞኒያል የሆነውን ክፍለ ጊዜ በሚመለከት እስካሁን ያደረግናቸውን ነገሮች አስመልክቶ ትንሽ ሪፍሌክሽን ሰጥተው ይህን ሴሽን እንዲዘጉልን ሁለት የተቋማችን የስራ ኃላፊዎች ወደዚህ በድጋሚ ጋብዛለሁ። እነሱ ወደዚህ ይመጡና የምሳውንም ፕሮግራም በዛ የሚያስጀምሩን ይሆናል። ክቡር አቶ ዳሄ አሪያ ስላሴ የብሔራዊ መታወቂያ ፕሮጀክት ስራ አስኪያጅና ክቡር አቶ ሄኖክ ጥላሁን የፕሮጀክቱ የኢንሮልመንት አስተባባሪ አብራችሁ ነው የምትመጡት ወይስ? እሺ፣ ሁለቱም ወደዚህ መጥተው ፕሮግራሙን የጠዋቱን ያጠቃልሉናል።
Thank you so much. እንግዲህ በአዲስ ዓመት እየጀመርን ባለንበት ጊዜ በጣም ወርቃማ የሆነ ጊዜያችሁን እንደሰዋችሁ ብዙ ኃላፊዎች ገምታለሁ። ቴንክ ዩ ሶ ማች። ምክንያቱም ይሄ ወርዚ ለሆነ ኮዝ ነው እዚህ የተገኘ ነው። ብዙ ጊዜ መታወቂያ ሲባል ወረዳ፣ ቀበሌ ወር እንደዚህ አነስ ተብሎ ነው የሚታየው። ግን አይ ሆፕ ካያችሁትም ቴስቲሞኒያል ቪዲዮ ሊኖረው የሚችለውን ኢምፓክት ትራንስፎርሜሽናል እንደሆነ ያው ከተጠቀምንበት ትራንስፎርሜሽናል ነው የሚለውን ሜሴጅ ለማስተላለፍ ሞክረናል። ኖቲስ ካረጋችሁ ሰዓታችን በጣም እያከበርን ያለ ነው። ኢንፋክት one of the best programs እስከ ዛሬ ሰዓት በማክበር ይሄ ነው ተብሎ ሊሸለም ይችላል። ምን እናድርግ? አንዱ እንግዲህ የዚህ ዓላማ ጧትም ሲመዘገቡ እንዳያችሁት እናቱ ተፈሪ የመንግስት ኃላፊዎች ዲጂታል አይዲ እየወሰዱ እንትን ማድረግ ፕሮሞት የማድረግ እንትን ሀሳብ ይዘናልና ክቡር የኢትዮጵያ ቻምበር ኦፍ ኮመርስ ፕሬዚዳንት እንዲሁም ክቡር ዶክተር አብዮት ከሚኒስትሪ ኦፍ ኢኖቬሽን የዲጂታል ትራንስፎርሜሽን ሄድ እናንተ መድረክ ላይ የቅድሙ ቦታ ላይ ሄዳችሁ እንድትመዘገቡልን በአክብሮት እየጠየቅኩኝ ለቀረው ደግሞ ታዳሚዎቻችን የኮሚትመንት የምናስገባችሁ 5 ደቂቃ ብቻ እንወስዳለን። እባካችሁ ወደ መድረክ ወደ ጨለም ብሏል፣ ወደዛ እንዲበራላችሁ። ኦኬ ምናልባት እንግዲህ የብዙ የባንክ ፕሬዚዳንቶች እዚህ ያላችሁ፣ የቫይስ ፕሬዚዳንቶች ያለው ከናሽናል ባንክ፣ ከኢትዮ ቴሌኮም፣ ከተለያዩ ሴክተር ሬጉሌተሮች የመጣችሁ ብዙ ኃላፊዎች ያላችሁ፣ የፕራይቬት ሴክተር ደግሞ በቻምበር ኦፍ ኮሜርስ በኩል የፕራይቬት ሴክተሩን የንግድ ማህበረሰቡን ወክለው የተገኙ የተለያዩ የንግድ ማህበረሰብ ፐርሰናሊቲዎች እናያለና ኢንኬዝ እንግዲህ የከሰዓቱ ብሬክአውት ሴሽን ዲቴይል ቴክኒካል ብሬክዳውን ውስጥ የምንገባበት ጊዜ ነው። የከሰዓቱ ብሬክአውት ሴሽን ላይ ላትኖሩ ስለምትችሉ ይሄን 5 ደቂቃ ኃላፊዎቹ እስኪመዘገቡ ድረስ ኢምፖርታንት መልእክት ለዚህ አሁን ለያዝነው በተለይ ለያዝነው ለ2015 ዓመተ ምህረት ኢምፖርታንት መልእክት ከእናንተም በኩል ኮሚትመንት ስለሚያስፈልግ እሱን ለመናገር ነው መድረክ ላይ ወጣሁት። ጧት እንደተናገርኩት ሁለት ዋና ስራዎች አሉ። የመጀመሪያው ስራችን ሰዎችን ኦንቦርድ ማድረግ ነው። ሰዎችን ኦንቦርድ ስናደርግ ዲጂታል መታወቂያ የሌለው ሰው ዲጂታል መታወቂያ እንዲኖረው ማድረግ ማለት ነው። ሁለተኛው ስራችን ደግሞ የአውተንቲኬሽን ኔትወርክ የአውተንቲኬሽን ኢኮሲስተም መዘርጋት ነው። ይሄ ማለት የናሽናል አይዲ እንደ ፕላትፎርም ከባንክ፣ ከቴሌኮም፣ ከአግሪካልቸር፣ ከኤጁኬሽን ከሁሉም ፕሮጀክቶች ጋር ኢንተግሬት ማድረግ ነው። እነዚህን ሁለቱንም ስናደርግ there is a commercial element to it እኛ በራሳችን ፋይናንስ የኦንቦርዲንጉን ስራ ከቨር ለማድረግ ፈንዶች እያፈላለግን የፋይናንሲንግ ምንጭ ሴኩር እያደረግን እንገኛለን። ኦንቦርድ ስናደርግ ዜጎችን ልክ ዛሬ እንዳያችሁት የኦንቦርዲንግ ፕሮሰስ ክፍያ አይጠየቅም። ምክንያቱም ኢንክሉሲቭ ለመሆን ለኦንቦርዲንግ ክፍያ አይጠየቅም። ግን የኦንቦርዲንግ ኢኮሲስተም የኦንቦርዲንግ ኔትወርክ የኤጀንት ኔትወርክ የሱፐር ኤጀንት ኔትወርክ ስትራቴጂ ከሰዓት በዲቴል እናየዋለን። እሱን እየዘረጋን ነው። ሰው ኦንቦርድ ስላደረገ አንድ ኢንቲቲ አንድ ኤጀንሲ ኦር አንድ ባንክ ሎስ እንዲሆኑ አንፈልግም። ሰው ኦንቦርድ ባደረገ ቁጥር ዊል ሴት አሳይድ ፈንድስ ለኦንቦርዲንግ ወጪዎችን ኮምፐንሴት የሚያደርጉበትን ኢኮሲስተም እየዘረጋን ነው። ኦንቦርድ ከተደረገ ቀጥሎ ደግሞ ኬዋይሲ ነው። ኬዋይሲ ለምሳሌ በባንክ እንደምታውቁት አዲስ ከስተመር ነኝ አካውንት ክፈቱልኝ ብል መታወቂያ ኮፒ ይደረጋል። ያ ፎቶ ኮፒ ደግሞ ሄዶ ይረጋገጣል። የሚረጋገጥበት ቦታ መንጃ ፍቃድ ማነው የቀበሌ መታወቂያ ከሆነ የቀበሌ ድረስ ሄዶ ነው የሚረጋገጠው። የታይም እና የሪሶርስ የብዙ ወጪ ይደረጋል ነው። ኬዋይሲ ኢትስ ኖት አ ፍሪ ሰርቪስ። እኛ ኬዋይሲ በኋላ ፔድ ሰርቪስ አድርገን ነው ለስቴክሆልደሮቻችን የምናቀርበው። ፔድ ሰርቪስ አድርገን በምናቀርብ ጊዜ ከስተመሩ ላይ ያ ኮስት እንዲንጸባረቅ ሳይሆን በፊት የነበረውን ኮንቬንሽናል ትራዲሽናል የነበረውን ኬዋይሲ ቺፐር እና ፋስተር በጣም ፋስተር በተወሰኑ ሰከንዶች ውስጥ ጋራንቲድ የሆነ ከስተመር ዩኒክነስ የምናረጋግጥበት ስርዓት እየዘረጋን ስለሆነ በጣም ሚኒማል የሆነች ፔመንት ኢኮሲስተም እንዘረጋለን። እሱን በምንዘረጋ ጊዜ እንግዲህ አንዱ እዚህ ጋር ማስተላለፍ የፈለኩት መልእክት አሁን በዛሬው ዕለት ከኛ ጋር ኢንተግሬት ብታረጉ ለኬዋይሲ አናስከፍልም። በቀጣይ ግን የተወሰኑ ወራት ይሄ ስርዓቱ በደንብ ተዘርግቶ የኬዋይሲ ኢኮሲስተማችን መሬት ላይ በወረደ ሰዓት ግን እንደ ማንኛውም ኢንፍራስትራክቸር ልክ ለዩቲሊቲ ለኢንተርኔት ለመብራት እንደሚከፈለው ኬዋይሲም እንደ ሰርቪስ ማስከፈል እንጀምራለን። ኢን ዘ ሚን ታይም ግን እኛም የፋይናንሲንግ ሶርሳችንን እስክናረጋግጥ ድረስ ሰፖርት ከኦል ዳይሬክሽንስ እንፈልጋለን። እዚህ ጋር መናገር የፈለኩት መልእክት ለምትሰጡን ሰፖርት ኢትስ ኖት ዶኔሽን አይደለም። ዛሬ ሰፖርት ከሰጣችሁን ቤዝድ ኦን አግሪመንት በኋላ የኬዋይሲ ሰርቪስ ኮምፐንሴት እናደርጋለን የሚለው መልእክት ለማስተላለፍ ነው። ዛሬ ክሎዝሊ አብረን እንስራ፣ በራችን ክፍት ነው። በ2015 ዓመተ ምህረት በቅርበት ለመስራት ፖቴንሻል ጥሩ ፖቴንሻል አላቸው ብለን የለየናቸውን ዩዝ ኬዞች ሄኖክ ሊስቱን ባጭሩ ብሪፍ ያደርገናል።
እሺ፣ አመሰግናለሁ። ሁላችሁም እንኳን ደህና መጣችሁ። ሄኖክ ጥላሁን እባላለሁ። በብሔራዊ መታወቂያ ፕሮግራም የምዝገባ ስራዎችን እመራለሁ። እዚህ ውስጥ ካላችሁ በፓይለት ትግበራ ጊዜ ከተለያዩ ተቋማት መሪዎችና በስራችሁ ከሚሰሩ የስራ ኃላፊዎች ጋር አብረን ሰርተናልና ላደረጋችሁልን ትብብርም በዚሁ አጋጣሚ ላመሰግን እፈልጋለሁ። በፓይለቱ ጊዜ 100 ሺህ አካባቢ ሰዎች መዝግበናል። ወደ ዋናው ሀገር አቀፍ ትግበራ ከመግባታችን በፊት ሲስተሞቻችንን ቴስት ማድረግ አለብን። ሴንሲታይዜሽን፣ ሌሎች ስራዎች መስራት ነበረብንና ዋና ዋና ሴክተሮች ላይ ያንን አድርገናል። በመንግስት ትልቅ ትኩረት ከሚሰጠው አንዱ የትምህርት ዘርፍ ነው። ብዙ ተዋናይ ያሉበትና እሱ ላይ ትልቅ ምዝገባ አድርገናል። ሌላኛው በልማታዊ ሴፍቲኔት ፕሮግራም ተጠቃሚዎችን በሁለት ክልሎች መዝግበናል፣ ሲዳማ ክልልና ኦሮሚያ ክልል። በቀጣይ በደቡብ ክልል በሚቀጥለው ዓመት በሌሎቹም አስፍተን እንሄዳለን። ከወርክ ፎርስ ማኔጅመንት ጋር በተያያዘ በኢንዱስትሪ ፓርኮች ውስጥ ያሉ ሰራተኞችን በሁለት ኢንዱስትሪ ትላልቅ ፓርኮች ላይ ሄደን መዝግበናል። በተቀረ ደግሞ ከባንኮች ጋር ወደ 7 ከሚጠጉ ባንኮች ጋር የሄድኳርተር ስታፍ ምዝገባ አድርገን ፓይለቱን አጠናቀናል። ከዚህ ተነስተን ወደ ናሽናል ሮል አውት እንገባለን። በዚህ በ2015 10 ሚሊዮን እና ከዛ በላይ ኢትዮጵያውያንና በኢትዮጵያ የሚኖሩ ሌጋል ሬዚደንትስ እንመዘግባለን ብለናል። እንዲሁ ዝርዝሩን ልነግራችሁ ፈልጋለሁ። ዋናው የፋይናንስ ሴክተር ነው። ፋይናንስ ሴክተር ላይ ያሉ ባንኮች እና ሌሎች በፋይናንስ ውስጥ ያሉ ኢንሹራንሶችን ጨምሮ ክሬዲት አሶሲዬሽንስ ሊሆን ይችላል፣ ማይክሮ ፋይናንስ ኢንስቲትዩሽንስ እነሱን ጨምሮ ተጠቃሚዎቻቸውንም ወደ መመዝገብ እንገባለን በጋራ ከእነዚህ ተቋማት ጋር። ሌላው ቴሌኮም ሴክተር ነው። ቴሌኮም እና ባንኮች በጣም ብዙ ህዝብ የሚያገለግሉ ሴክተሮች ናቸው። በእነኚህ በኩል ብዙውን የኢትዮጵያ ህዝብ ለመድረስ ይቻላል ብለን እናስባለን። አብረን እየሰራን ነው። ሌላኛው እንደገና የተማሪዎች ነው። 30 ሚሊዮን እና ከዛ በላይ ተማሪዎች አሉ ኢትዮጵያ ላይ ከሃየር ኤዱኬሽን ጀምሮ እስከ ቅድመ መደበኛ ድረስ እዛ ውስጥ በሀገሪቱ ዙሪያ ምዝገባ እናካሄዳለን። በሄልዝ ሴክተር በጤና ሴክተር ደግሞ ከጤና ኢንሹራንስ ጋር ከመንግስት ሰራተኞችና እንዲሁ ጤና መድን ኢንሹራንስ የሚባል አለ። ከሱ ጋር ምዝገባዎችን እናካሂዳለን። በግብርና ላይ ደግሞ የግብርና ፈርቲላይዘር የተለያዩ ቤኔፊትስ የሚሰጡ ከኤቲኤ አግሪካልቸራል ትራንስፎርሜሽን ኤጀንሲ እና ሌሎችም ከግብርና ሚኒስቴር ጋር የተያያዙ በገጠሪቱ ኢትዮጵያ ያሉትን ሰዎችን መዘግባለን። እንግዲህ ዲጂታል አይዲ ለሁሉም ነው የምንለው ከተማና ፋይናንሻል ሰርቪስ፣ ቴሌኮም ሰርቪስ አክሰስ የሚያደርጉ ሰዎችን ብቻ ሳይሆን እንደዚሁ አብዛኛው የማህበረሰባችን ቤዝ ያለበትን በገጠር አካባቢ ያሉትንም ጭምር የሚያጠቃልል ነው። በፓይለቱ ምዝገባ ላይ በፕሮዳክቲቭ ሴፍቲ ኔት የመዘገብናቸው የገጠር ከተማዎች ናቸው። በመኪና ለመድረስ የሚያስቸግሩትንም ጭምር ነው ሄደን የመዘገብ ነው። ምክንያቱም እነሱም ለዚህ ኢኳሊ ሁሉም ሰው ሊደርሰው የሚገባ የሁሉም ሰው መብት ስለሆነ ማለት ነው። ከዛ በመቀጠል እናሰፋዋለን። ይሄንኑ የሶሻል ቤኔፊት ፕሮግራም በገጠር ብቻ ሳይሆን ከተማ መሀል ላይም ተጠቃሚዎች አሉ። እነሱንም በመመዝገብ እንቀጥላለን። ከትራንስፖርት ሚኒስቴር ጋር ሆነን ከድራይቪንግ ላይሰንስ እና ከሌሎች ሰርቪሶች ጋር አብረን የምንመዘግብ ይሆናል። ከወርክ ፎርስ ማኔጅመንት ጋር በተያያዘ ከሲቪል ሰርቪስ ኮሚሽን ጋር አብረን እየሰራ ነው። በአዲስ አበባም ከአዲስ አበባም ውጭ ባሉ በሲቪል ሰርቪስ ውስጥ የሚካተቱ ሰራተኞችን እንመዘግባለን። እንዲሁ ከሚኒስትሪ ኦፍ ሌበር ኤንድ የስራ ፈጠራ ጋር በተያያዘ ከወጣቶች ስራ ፈጠራ፣ ከሴቶች ስራ ፈጠራ፣ ለውጭ ሀገር ለስራ ከሚሄዱት ጋር በተያያዘ እነዚህ ጋር ምዝገባ በዚህ ዓመት እናካሄዳለን። በዚህ ዓመት እንግዲህ 10 ሚሊዮን እና ከዛ በላይ ምዝገባ እናካሄዳለን ብለን እናስባለን። ከዚህ ውስጥ ደግሞ የተወሰኑትን በፓይለት አውተንቲኬሽን ለመጀመር እናስባለን። ምዝገባው ብቻ ሳይሆን ለምሳሌ ከፋይናንስ ሴክተር ከባንኮች ጋር ሊሆን ይችላል። ከነዚህ ከተመረጡት ጋር ዲጂታል አይዲን ይዘው ሰዎች ኢንቱ አክቹዋል ዩዝ ተጠቅመውት አውተንቲኬት እያደረጉ ይሄ ዲጂታል አይዲ ሰርቪስ ዴሊቨሪውን ሲያቀላጥፍ ማየት እንፈልጋለን እና በዚህ በ2015 ፓይለት የአውተንቲኬሽን እንጀምራለን። ስላዳመጣችሁን ያመሰግናለሁ።
ቴንክ ዩ ሶ ማች። አመሰግናለሁ ሁላችሁንም። የውጪ የሬጅስትሬሽን ኪቶች አሉ። እንደተናገርኩት በነፃ ፍላጎት ላይ የተመሰረተ ስለሆነ የሚፈልግ ሰው መመዝገብ ይችላል። ሜንሽን ሳናደርግ ማለፍ ማንፈልገው 2 ሮድማፕ እያዘጋጀን ነው። አንደኛው ለቴሌኮም ሴክተር ከኢትዮጵያ ኮሚኒኬሽን አገልግሎት ጋር በመሆን አውቶሪቲ ጋር ባለስልጣን ጋር በመሆን የቴሌኮም ሴክተር እንዴት ከዲጂታል አይዲ ጋር ቴሌኮም ሴክተር 50-60 ሚሊዮን በላይ ሰብስክራይበር አለው። ሁለተኛው ሮድማፕ ደግሞ ለፋይናንስ ሴክተር ነው። ዘ ኤሌፋንት ኢን ዘ ሩም ፋይናንስ ሴክተር በሬጉሌሽን ወይም በዳይሬክቲቭ ተገዶ ሳይሆን የሚፈልገው ነገር ነው። ምንም ጥያቄ የለው። ለፋይናንስ ሴክተር ከናሽናል ባንክ ጋር መቼ አስገዳጅ እናድርገው፣ መቼ ሮል አውት ይደረግ የሚል ሮድማፕ እየሰራ ነው። ሱነር ኦር ሌተር ግን ክሪቲካል የሆነ ኢንፍራስትራክቸር መሆኑ ስለማይቀር ቅድም እንደተናገርኩት ቀድሞ የመጣ ቀድሞ ኢንተግሬት ያደረገና ቀድሞ አገልግሎቱን ከዚህ ስርዓት ጋር የያዘ ይጠቀማል የሚለው መልእክት ለማስተላለፍ ነው። እጅግ በጣም እናመሰግናለን። የምሳ እረፍት ይኖረናል። ከምሳ በኋላ ፓናል ዲስከሽን እና የብሬክአውት ሴሽን ቴክኒካሊ ከምንገባባቸው ሴሽኖች ይኖሩናል። ስለሰጣችሁን ጊዜ እጅግ አድርገን ሁላችሁንም በጣም እናመሰግናለን። ቴንክ ዩ።
ክቡራትና ክቡራን እንደምንላችኋል። ይህ የአይደንቲቲ ዴይ ወይንም በዓለም አቀፍ ደረጃ የሚከበረው የመታወቂያ ቀን በዓልና የኢትዮጵያ ብሔራዊ መታወቂያ ፕሮግራም ይፋ የማድረጊያ ስነ ስርዓት የከሰዓት በኋላው ፕሮግራም ነው። በዚህ በከሰዓት በኋላው ክፍለ ጊዜ ጠለቅና ዘርዘር ያሉ ጉዳዮች ተፍታተው ውይይት የሚደረግባቸው የፓናል ውይይት ክፍለ ጊዜ እና ሌሎች በሁለት ክፍል ተከፍለው የሚደረጉ ውይይቶች ይኖሩናል። ከሱ በፊት ግን የዚህ ሀገር አቀፍ ፕሮጀክት ትልቁና ዋና ሊባል የሚችለው ጠቀሜታ ከፋይናንስ ስርዓትና አገልግሎት ጋር የተያያዘ እንደመሆኑ መካከላችን ያሉት የብሔራዊ ባንክ ምክትል ገዢ ክቡር አቶ ሰለሞን ደስታ ወደዚህ በመምጣት የኛውን ክፍለ ጊዜ በንግግር ይከፍቱልን ዘንድ ከፍ ባለ አክብሮት እንጋብዛለን።
አመሰግናለሁ ፕሮግራም አስተባባሪ ቴንኪዩ። የተከበራችሁ የሕዝብ ተወካዮች ምክር ቤት ቋሚ ኮሚቴ አባላት፣ ክቡር አቶ ዮዳሄ ዘሚካኤል የብሔራዊ መታወቂያ ፕሮግራም ዳይሬክተር፣ ክቡራትና ክቡራን የበዓሉ ታዳሚዎች በሙሉ እንደምን ዋላችሁ? አሁንም ቀዝቅዟል። እንኳን ለመታወቂያ ቀን በሰላም አደረሳችሁ እላለሁ። በቅድሚያ በዚህ ደማቅ የመታወቂያ ቀን የኢትዮጵያ ብሔራዊ ባንክ ገዥ ክቡር ዶክተር ይናገር ደሴን ወክዬ በመካከላችሁ በመገኘቴ ክብርና ደስታ ይሰማኛል። እንደምታውቁት የኢትዮጵያ ብሔራዊ ባንክ በአዋጅ ከተሰጡት ተልዕኮዎች መካከል ጤናማ የፋይናንስ ስርዓት መገንባት የሚል ይገኝባቸዋል። ከሚሽኖች ውስጥ አንዱ ፎስተሪንግ ፋይናንሻል ሳውንድነስ የሚል ስላለ ይህን ዓላማ እውን ከማድረግ አንጻር በአሁኑ ጊዜ በኢትዮጵያ የፋይናንስ ዘርፍ በርካታ የሪፎርም ስራዎች በመከናወን ላይ ናቸው። በተለይም በቅርንጫፍ ስርጭት፣ በወለድ ነፃ የፋይናንስ አገልግሎት እንዲሁም በዲጂታል የፋይናንስ አገልግሎት ረገድ የተመዘገበው ስኬት እጅጉን የሚያስደንቅ ነው። ትናንት ክቡር ጠቅላይ ሚኒስትራችን ያገኙት የጊፋ 2022 ወይም ከወለድ ነፃ የፋይናንስ አገልግሎት ሽልማት እኛ ስለ ራሳችን ከምናወራው በላይ ዓለም ስለ እኛ ማውራት ስለመጀመሩ ሁነኛ ማሳያ ነው። በዲጂታል የፋይናንስ አገልግሎት ረገድም ቢሆን እንደ አውሮፓ አቆጣጠር ጁን 2022 መሰረት የሞባይል ገንዘብ ሂሳብ ቁጥር አሁን ከዚህም በላይ ነው፣ ግን በዚያ ጊዜ 43.3 ሚሊዮን፣ ከዚህም መካከል ደግሞ ከግማሽ በላይ የቴሌ ብር ድርሻ ነው። የሞባይል ባንኪንግ ተጠቃሚዎች ቁጥርም 16.3 ሚሊዮን፣ የኢንተርኔት ባንኪንግ ተጠቃሚዎች ቁጥርም እንደዚሁ 4.4 ሚሊዮን፣ እንዲሁም የዴቢት ካርድ ተጠቃሚዎች ቁጥር 30.7 ሚሊዮን ደርሷል። ይህ አስደማሚ እድገት ነው። በቅርቡ በቴሌ ብርና በዳሽን ባንክ በጋራ ይፋ በተደረገው የማይክሮ ቁጠባ፣ የማይክሮ ብድርና የኦቨርድራፍት አገልግሎት አማካኝነት ከ100 ሺህ የሚበልጡ ደንበኞች ከብር 138 ሚሊዮን ብር በላይ መቆጠብ በቻላቸው ለዚህ ጥሩ ማሳያ ነው። አበዛኸው ካላላችሁኝ በዲጂታል የፋይናንስ አገልግሎት ዘርፍ ጭምር በቅርብ ዓመታት በሚመዘገብ መርታ ኢትዮጵያ ሌላ ዓለም አቀፍ ሽልማት እንደምታገኝ አትጠራጠሩ። ከዚህም ሌላ የፋይናንስ ዘርፉ የውጭ ዜግነት ላላቸው ትውልደ ኢትዮጵያውያን ኢንቨስትመንት ቀደም ሲል የተከፈተ ሲሆን በቅርቡ ደግሞ ለውጭ ዜጎች ክፍት መደረጉ ወይንም ፖሊሲው ይፋ መደረጉ ይታወሳል። በመሆኑም የፋይናንስ ዘርፍ በሚያስደንቅ እድገት፣ ጤናማነት፣ ትርፋማነትና አካታችነት ላይ ይገኛል። ይህ ማለት ግን ተግዳሮት ዘርፉ የሉበትም ማለት አይደለም። ካሉብን ተግዳሮቶች መካከል የመሰረተ ልማት ውስንነት ዋነኛውን ቦታ የሚወስድ ሲሆን በተለይም የብሔራዊ መታወቂያ አለመኖር ዘርፉን በብዙ መልኩ ጎድቶታል ማለት ይቻላል። በተለምዶ ማሞ ሌላ መታወቂያው ሌላ የምንለው ከመቼውም ጊዜ በላይ አሁን እውን ሆኖ ይገኛል። ዛሬ በርካታ የሐሰት መታወቂያዎች በሕገወጦች ተመርተው በግለሰቦች እጅ እንደገቡና ትክክለኛነታቸውን ማረጋገጥም አስቸጋሪ እንደሆነ ግልጽ ነው። ይህም ዘርፉን ለሕገወጥ የፋይናንስ ግብይት፣ ለመጭበርበር፣ በወንጀል የተገኘን ገንዘብ ሕጋዊ አስመስሎ ለማቅረብ፣ ሽብርተኝነትን በገንዘብ ለመደገፍ እንዲሁም ለሌሎች ፋይናንስ ነክ የወንጀል ድርጊቶች ተጋላጭ አድርጎታል። ባለፉት 4 ዓመታት ወደ ብር 1.9 ቢሊዮን ዘርፉ በአጭበርባሪዎች ምክንያት ማጣቱን ከወራት በፊት ይፋ የተደረገው ጥናት እንዳረጋገጠልን እናስታውሳለን። እንደ አውሮፓ አቆጣጠር በ2017 20 በመቶ የነበረው የፋይናንስ አካታችነት አሁን ወደ 45 በመቶ ከፍ ማለቱ ትልቅ ስኬት ቢሆንም ከጎረቤት ሀገሮች በተለይም ከኬንያ 85 በመቶ አንጻር ሲታይ ዝቅተኛ እንደሆነ ማየት ይቻላል። የፋይናንስ ዘርፉ አገልግሎት በተለይም ብድር በከተሞች በተለይም በአዲስ አበባ በሚገኙ ጥቂት ተበዳሪዎች እጅ የተከማቸ ነው። ለአብነት ያክል ከ100 በመቶ በታች የሆኑ ተበዳሪዎች የወሰዱት የባንክ ዘርፍ ብድር ከ44 በመቶ ይበልጣል። ኢማጂን ከ1 በመቶ በታች ተበዳሪዎች ኦልሞስት 50 ግማሹን ያክል ብድር እንደወሰዱ ነው መረጃዎች የሚያሳዩ። በተመሳሳይ ከ79 በመቶ በላይ የባንኩ ዘርፍ ብድር የተሰጠው ለአዲስ አበባ ብቻ ነው። እጅጉን የሚገርመው ደግሞ ከ99 በመቶ በላይ የባንኮች ብድር የሚገኘው በከተማ ተበዳሪዎች እጅ መሆኑና ከ80 በመቶ በላይ የሚሆነው የገጠሩ አርሶ አደርና አርብቶ አደር ሕዝብ የብድር ተጠቃሚ አለመሆኑ ነው። በከተማም ቢሆን ጥቃቅንና አነስተኛ ተቋማት በእጅጉ ከፋይናንስ አገልግሎት የተገለሉ ናቸው። የብሔራዊ መታወቂያ አለመኖር ቀልጣፋ፣ ተአማኒነትን የተላበሰና እሴትን የሚጨምር አገልግሎት ከመስጠት አኳያ ጋሬጣ መሆኑም ጎልቶ ይታያል። የኢትዮጵያ ዲጂታል ስትራቴጂ 2025 በቅድም ጀምሮ ሲነሳ የነበረው ስትራቴጂ ከመውጣቷ ባሻገር ከ2021 እስከ 2024 ስራ ላይ የሚውል ብሔራዊ ዲጂታል ክፍያ ስትራቴጂ ኢትዮጵያ አውጥታ በመተግበር ላይ ትገኛለች። ይህ ስትራቴጂ ታሳቢ ካደረጋቸው ወሳኝ ጉዳዮች መካከል ዲጂታል መታወቂያ ይገኝበታል። ከዚህ አንጻር ብሔራዊ መታወቂያን በኢትዮጵያ በሰፊው ለመጀመር የፖሊሲ፣ የፍኖተ ካርታ፣ የሕግና የቁጥጥር ማዕቀፍ በማዘጋጀት ከ2015 ዓመተ ምህረት በፊት ከ70 ሚሊዮን በላይ ዲጂታል መታወቂያ ለማደል በመንግስት መታቀዱ ከላይ የተጠቀሱትን ችግሮች ከመቅረፍ አካታች፣ ምስጢራዊነቱ የተጠበቀ፣ ግልጽነትን፣ አካታችነትን እና ተጠያቂነትን የተላበሰ እንዲሁም ቀልጣፋ የፋይናንስ አገልግሎት ከማቅረብ አኳያ ተስፋ ሰጪ እርምጃ ሲሆን የፋይናንስ ዘርፉም ሆነ የኢትዮጵያ ብሔራዊ ባንክ ከዚህ በእጅጉ ተጠቃሚዎች ይሆናሉ። በዚህ ረገድ እየሰሩ ያሉትን በተለይም የብሔራዊ መታወቂያ ፕሮግራምን ሌሎች ባለድርሻ አካላትንና እዚህ የታደማችሁትን በሙሉ ለማመስገን እፈልጋለሁ። እንደ ወትሮ ሁሉ የኢትዮጵያ ብሔራዊ ባንክም ድጋፍና ትብብር ውጥኑን እውን ከማድረግ አኳያ ተጠናክሮ እንደሚቀጥል በዚህ አጋጣሚ ለማረጋገጥ እፈልጋለሁ። በመጨረሻም መልካም የውይይት ጊዜ እንዲሆን እመኛለሁ። ፈጣሪ ኢትዮጵያን ይባርክ። አመሰግናለሁ።
የብሔራዊ ባንካችን ምክትል ገዢ ክቡር አቶ ሰለሞን ደስታ በጣም ኢንስፓየር የሚያደርግ በጣም ኤነርጀቲክ የሆነ አፕሮች ስላላቸው እና በመካከላችንም ተገኝተው ይህንን የመሰለ ንግግር ስላደረጉ ደስ ብሎ እንደገና በጭብጨባ እናመስግናቸው። ቀዝቅዟል ስላሉ እንዳልቀዘቀዝ ደግሞም እንደ እውነቱን ለመናገር ይሄ ማሞ ሌላ መታወቂያው ሌላ ይባለው ነገር አሁን እሳቸው 1.9 ቢሊዮን ብር ይዞብን ሄደዋል። እንደውም ተመስገን ነው የኛ ህዝብ ደግና የዋ በመሆኑ ነው እንጂ ፋንክሽናል አይዲ የሚባሉት እነዚህ አሁን በመንጃ ፈቃድ አንድ ሰው ጋምቤላ ላይ ሁለተኛ መንጃ ፈቃድ ያወጣና ሐዋሳ ላይ ሶስተኛ አውጥቶ ሁለት መንጃ ፈቃድ ቢኖረው ምን ችግር አለው? በአንደኛው የፈለገውን ይሰራልና እንደውም እግዚአብሔር አውጥቶናልና ብዙ ሳንጎዳ በፊት ይሄ ስለደረሰልን በጣም ደስ ሊለን ይገባል። ብሔራዊ ባንክም ከዚህ ፕሮጀክት ጋር በአጋርነት አብሮ ለመስራት ቁርጠኝነቱን ስላሳየ ደስ ብሎናል። ከዚህ በመቀጠል የምናደርገው የፓናል ውይይት ነው የሚኖረን። ይህንን ፓናል ዲስከሽን የሚመሩልንን ሰው ወደዚህ ወደ መድረክ እንጋብዛለን። ከዛ በኋላ እሳቸው ፓናሊስቶቻቸውን አስተዋውቀው ወደ መድረክ በመጥራት የፓናል ውይይቱ የሚቀጥል ይሆናል። ይህንን ጊዜ የሚመሩልን ክቡር አቶ ራዚየን ቸርነት የኦርቢት ሄልዝ ቺፍ ኤግዚኪዩቲቭ ኦፊሰር ናቸው። እሳቸው ይህንን የፓናል ሴሽን እንዲመሩልን በታላቅ አክብሮት ወደ መድረክ እንጋብዛለን።
Once again, I'd like to say welcome to Digital ID Day. We're going to have a panel. I'm going to start calling names and our respected panelists to come to the floor. And then we're going to hold our seats and conduct the conversation. I hope it's going to be okay to conduct the conversation in English. And that's how we're going to proceed. Engineer Melaku Zazo, President of Ethiopian Chamber of Commerce. I'd like to invite you to front. Mr. Al Shifarao, Deputy Chief of Party and Technical Director at JSI. Dr. Mabet Melesa, the VP of Reform and Transformation at CBE. Mr. Ibrahim Mama Hussein, the Senior Project Manager in Digital Center of Excellence. Mr. Rahul Rishi, Africa, India, Middle East, Public Sector Lead at Ernst & Young. Mr. Rahul. Oh, okay. And we have Mr. Naga Santham, the Chief Dissemination Officer at MOSIP. And finally, we have Ms. Tigger Staffwork, the Chief Operation Officer at Goodeye On. At different use cases, at the end of the day, the digital ID relevance is when it's applied into something that's meaningful and practical. We'll be talking about different use cases by pulling different examples. And from cover, we'll cover also what are the expectations, what are the laws of the land that govern how this information could be utilized. But at the same time, what are the responsibilities of the governing body and citizens as well. And also, we'll be also looking into the inclusive nature of having digital ID? How do you go about it? And what are the practical examples? And I guess from here, we'll also talk about the country ownership, scalability, sustainability, and adaptability perspective. We'll have a specific conversation. I think with that, I'm gonna start the first question. So one of the things I'd like to also level set amongst all the panelists is that Ethiopia is not an island, so there are some global experiences. So if you can pull some practical examples how it's done elsewhere and how we can leverage and benefit collectively, that would be wonderful. The very first question is for Rahul. Let's talk about identity. What is it? And what do we mean by when we say digital ID? So this is for Mr. Rahul.
Thanks a lot. I think while I'm tempted to ask the deeper philosophical question that it answers of who am I, but I think it's far simpler than that. I think it's just verification of somebody's identities in a secure manner, ensuring that the private and the personal information is safeguarded. So that would be my simpler definition. But if you really peel this a bit more, when identity is sought, really works on three tenets. What information you have, which is the old system of email and password and applications. The second tenet is, of course, what you have. So we all carried cards for, providing authentication, having a picture, a photograph. And the third, of course, is what I am in the sense our physical attributes, which is biometrics. Now, when you look at a digital identity today and how it's evolved, obviously, all three forms are used, but the most secure way is using the third one, which is authenticating it against your biometrics. So the digital identity being intertwined with that aspect of it. But I think it's an ever-evolving field. And if I may add, I think as we have been bombarded with newer technologies. If I take the example of metaverse itself, today, the fact that we're moving into a virtual identity of an individual in the metaverse, or a digital twin, as a lot of them call it, I think the need for digital identity actually gravitates to even another level. So let me give you an example. Very recently, we all know of Sotheby's and Christie's, auction houses which have been there for almost 200 plus years. And I think just a few months back, they actually auctioned a digital series of digital paintings for I think around $3.6 million using NFT. So if you look at it, the identity of the asset there, which also would have a digital ID because it's a digital painting, and then paying using NFT, again, using an identity of nothing but token of numbers, which is really looking at the transfer of the transaction, is a good example of where you would find yourself doing multiple transactions, not only in the B2C space, but also where the government would transact with you. So the digital identity at a simpler level, like I said, but as we move down the timeline, I think we are heading for something which it takes even a greater meaning and weight for us.
Yeah. No, this is interesting because you kind of expanded it further, bringing an example of by identity. It could be a painting, but there is that unique nature of it. Let me just shift the conversation. So there are different IDs. There's foundational ID, functional ID, and whatnot. So Mr. Naga, so give us some sort of practical examples, the difference between foundational ID and functional ID, such as driver license.
Thank you so much. First, let me explain the difference between a foundational ID and a functional ID a little bit more in detail, because this will lay the path for many people here to understand the journey that Ethiopia is adopting as we speak. See, foundational ID is a unique ID that will be issued to all the residents of the nation, using which they can identify themselves. Who am I, like Rahul said. On the other front, a functional ID is an ID used for certain specific functional purposes. It need not be applicable for all the residents of the country. For example, a voter ID the minors may not be eligible, to have a voter ID, right? A driver's license, minors again may not be, eligible for a driver's license. What makes foundational ID so special? It may look very simple from the outset, but what makes us very special is the guiding principles behind it, right? The first guiding principle behind a foundational ID is it should be inclusive. That means to say that every resident of the country have the right to get a foundational ID, irrespective of, male, female, children, people staying in urban, rural, irrespective of that, it has to be inclusive. The second guiding principle is it has to be unique. That means to say that when the demographic and the biographic details or biometric details are captured, they have to be deduplicated and made sure that I have only one ID, issued, in this particular country. The third guiding principle is it should be non-intrusive. I think Ethiopia has done a fantastic job in that by capturing only the bare minimal and important details, in an ID system. This gives the confidence to the citizens to adapt the ID system, so because they are ensured that a lot of their personal details are not captured. Only the details that are bare minimum, are captured, which will not be used for any other purposes. The fourth important guiding principle is privacy and security, which has to be of prime importance, that needs to be taken care. And the fifth one is, of course, for using the use cases. There are two authentications that is possible, using a foundational ID. One is yes or no. I go and present it, using which, am I the guy, am I yes or no, am I a resident or no. Second is my KYC details that is shared. I want to just take few seconds to update a success story about India. I come from India. The ID system of India is called Aadhaar. Just by implementing the Aadhaar ID system and using the ID system for the use cases, the cost of service delivery, for example, opening a bank account, for opening issuing a SIM card and all those things, came down from few dollars to few cents, because of which lots and lots of people started adopting the banking mode of transactions. Before the Aadhaar was launched, only 17% of the Indian population, India has a 1.3 billion population, only 17% had their bank accounts. Because of Aadhaar and the cost of service delivery being so low, the number of people who adopted the bank accounts became 87% within 10 years. If Aadhaar was not there, for India to reach 87%, it would have taken us 56 years. This explains the importance of a foundational ID in a country.
Okay, thank you very much. I believe we're going to come back to the Indian example. Let me just switch gear a little bit. Let me ask one question to Mr. Ibrahim. What exactly is required to get this digital ID? And who are those individuals that should get, and who is excluded from getting this national ID? What are the specific sort of documentations? If you elaborate on that.
Sure. No, thank you, Patsia. As it was presented this morning, Yodahe was talking about it in his explanation of the FIDA program. Basically, national identity systems are designed to be universal. It is a right. Identity is a right. The ability to identify oneself is a universal right. And anything that's a right is supported by law. And this right is clearly enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, in the Article 6 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This is clearly enshrined in the Article 16 of the International Convention of the Rights of Civil and Political Rights. But most importantly, it's also clearly recognized in the International Convention of the Rights of the Child, because that is the basic reason why we say identity from birth is a universal right. So everybody is entitled to get a digital ID, an identification process. But what's required? Well, to start with, there are physical and other credentials required to actually get an ID. The first one is that you need to be able to prove that you are the person that you say you are. But what about those people who don't have documentations to prove they are who they claim to be they are? Well, this process of national ID process that we're currently implementing and supporting in Ethiopia does not discriminate. If you say it is a right, everybody has the right to get that ID. There's no process of discrimination. So long as you can prove, or so long as you can bring somebody that can prove that you are who you say you are, as an affidavit, as a witness, it's that law. But above that, we require documentations, for example, anything that you provide, birth certificate, driver's license, Kabali ID, or anything else. But for those who do not even have the capacity to provide this documentation, a certain testifying entity would be sufficient enough to actually grant them access to an ID system.
Okay, so what we're saying is you don't have to be a citizen of the country to get a digital ID.
Correct.
Anybody can qualify to get a digital ID without discrimination, as long as there is some a way of validating who the person is.
Correct.
Great. All right, so let's just shift the conversation a little bit. Now we are communicating to the public. You need to get a digital ID, a unique identity, and whatnot. Now let's talk about the relevance of the different use cases. Where is it going to be applied? I know Mr. Naga kind of mentioned it a little bit. Let me ask Al, just give us some practical application of where it could be used, why it's important.
Thanks. Can you hear me? All right, great. Thanks, Pazion, and thanks, everybody. So let me step back a little bit and talk about some of the values first, and then I'll give you samples from the health sector as to how the digital ID system, the foundation ID system can support us. First off, we've been building and investing on a lot of functional systems throughout the country across sectors, health, agriculture, finance, and so on. But in many cases, we build the systems lacking a foundational ID. What this has meant is the products, as good as they are, they come with limitations because those the limitations of not having to be able to track, I guess, to follow a process and an individual across systems. So it's very important that we see the work that we're doing as part of being an ecosystem. So even if you look at the health system as a whole, it's not really a silo, right? Because it touches different points of services, social services and financial systems and so on. So that's the second thing that we need to take a look into. And the third and most important thing, I think we should always think of ID as something that enables better services to customers, better services to clients, patients, and so on. So it's not so much a punitive thing. I think I want all of us to look at it from very much a positive angle. So as we do this, we got to be very intentional. So intentional in making sure that we build systems based on a solid foundation, and digital ID and financial payment systems are foundational to having us build systems that work very successfully. We got to look at what we do as being part of an ecosystem. So when we build something that it can work across other sectors, and we also have to make sure that what we do extends and improves the lives of the citizen and the residents. So that's the mindset I think we should all be coming from when we look at the digital ID and what it brings in terms of value for the country, the citizens. So health is my area, so I'll talk a little bit about health. And so I'm going to touch back to what I just said earlier about ecosystems, inclusion, and so on. So there's basically use cases within the health sector that is more internal. So I'll give you a very basic example that we're all familiar with right now is vaccination certificates, right? You want to be able to associate a person's identity to having taken some type of vaccination, say for COVID vaccination for travel. But you can also look at it as an important use case for, say, healthcare professionals. You want to be able to identify doctors, nurses, especially as they go between one region to another in a very large country like ours. But chief to the health sector, in my perspective, is health insurance, right? Because if you don't have a strong health insurance system, it's very difficult to reach your development goals, bottom line, right? I think we all learned from COVID how important health is for the overall stability even of the country. So that is the one use case I would consider to be internal to the health sector. So in Ethiopia, we have what we call community-based health insurance, and it's been actually quite a success. So we have about 42 million members with that, about 21 million households, and we have cards that have been issued to each of the households, and then within that, you have members that are uniquely identified. But when you think about that, that unique identification is really decentralized, right? You want to have a more centralized ID system that can go across, that can uniquely identify one person from another. The brief example from the Vice President has mentioned in the opening speech. So that is a very critical use case in the health sector. Health insurance is very big. And now, talking back to what I said earlier about ecosystems, we are not going to make the health insurance system work without having a touch point on the finance side. It is the finance system built again on the foundational ID or digital ID that allows these insurance recipients to be able to make dues, right? We want to make sure that people pay their dues on time. And once they pay, we want to be able to link that payment to the service. Likewise, when it comes to health centers and hospitals, we want them to be able to identify the person that has received the service is really who they say they are. So those are the two examples I can give you. I can go on and on. The mic over.
Okay. Thank you very much. Obviously, health from birth to growth affects all of us, and then I think it's probably one very, very clear sector that highlights the value, validity of having a unique digital ID. How about earlier, the access to funding, access to finance is limited because banks don't know who individuals are. So just tell us briefly its application.
Okay, thank you very much. When we came to the finance sector, by the way, having the national ID project completed has a great impact for the banks, a positive impact for the financial industry in Ethiopia. Because I believe that we can't address the large public because of the suspect of the risk of the borrowers which we have, because we don't have a unique identity for the citizen. As you know, when we go to a certain branch or a certain bank for account opening, we can use either of the identity card, the license, the driving license, or the passport, or the municipality ID cards. A single individual might have 3 accounts at 3 different branches. Even sometimes at the same branch, a single individual might have 2 or 3 accounts with different product namings. When we want to identify or when we want to track the customer experience, the customer journey, it's a great challenge for the banks to know even how that customer is utilizing the bank's product. So it was challenging the banking services at large. Because of that, as we all know, we have so many kind of credit products which we didn't allow till now. Like I can mention the credit card facility and also the mobile service, like the micro lending and saving products. Recently, Telebir has started that, actually launched that product. I believe it will be a great challenge without having a national ID in the country, engaging in such kind of business in the large mass or in the large scope. So it's having the national ID workable in the country might give us a great opportunity even to improve our customer experience, and also it will reduce the turnaround time, and also it will enable us to improve the customer service and to lower the operating expenses. Because everything has been done manually. The uniqueness of the Ethiopian National ID project is it's digital also. We are able to have a unique identity for a single individual. At a time, it's digital. Being a digital, we can track our customer. Even we can track their history of their health history. We can track, if at all it's important, we can track their income level. So that by having the information from that a single platform, we can increase even our lending limit also. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think with the banking industry, KYC, know your customer, is something that we repeatedly hear. Part of knowing the customer is that unique information about the individual and in their credit worthiness and their ability to pay back. Those are great examples. Let me switch gear a little bit and let's just talk about social services. Gdion is one of the company that is trying to really connect the dots between the need to hire a specific type of employees with basically jobs to available workforce. So tell us how Digital ID could be an enabler for the type of work that you guys are doing.
Thank you. When we start our job 2 years ago, we were all thinking about being inclusive. So we want to include everybody. We want to give the gig workers, the underprivileged, forgotten, to give them a digital access so that they can put at least what they have in the labor market so that they can get repeated gig calls and start to feed and support their family properly. And our problem in our country is not only about not getting a job, but most of us are underemployed. So helping the youth, especially being in Ethiopia, so most of our population are young and active in the labor force, including them in the labor market will support everybody. I mean, the country can grow, every year, how many thousands of new graduates join the labor market, and finding a job, a professional job, is not easy. And our day-to-day life is always supported by gig workers. It's almost as a culture for us to have somebody to come to our home and do some small gigs. And it's not easy to find somebody easily whenever you need help. There is no regulated system, or there is no registration, no place to find anybody. So giving everyone, inclusively, a digital presence for us was a target. And in our 2 years journey, we managed to onboard around 25,000 gig workers. Every morning when you go out of your house, you can see at the big corners of the street, young people standing there, hoping to get to be picked with somebody and get some and feed themselves and their family, and giving this young generation a platform where they can post their gift or their education. Because wherever we try to introduce this platform and tell people that we have a lot of working young people on the platform, the first question people are raising is, how do you know this person is, if he is educated, if he is not a criminal, if, they have a lot of questions to ask. And getting a national ID will give everybody a freedom, really, I believe, a freedom to work, a freedom to sell themselves, their ability, their potential. It will help everybody. As a company, for us, it's a big input. It will guarantee the trust between our gig workers and the customers they are serving. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think this is one critical space whereby trust will be there. Then I don't have to hire someone that I know, but rather someone that is skilled with verified identity can come work in my house, and I can have some level of trust. So that is really wonderful. Now, speaking of inclusion, let me switch gear a little bit, and I'm going to ask Engineer Malaku. Now, how do we meet the pressing need to register 75 million people in the foreseeable future? What kind of inclusive measures shall we apply? And how can we make a digital ID accessible by everyone, all citizens?
Thank you very much. When we consider about the value of the digital ID for the business community, it means a lot. from the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia ministerial, about there are 21 ministerial offices, about half of them related to economic sector. There are commissions, there are agencies related to the economic sector. The business community needs a very qualified service from the government. The business community needs a transparent service from the government. The business community needs accountable service from the government. This platform between the government and the business community should have in a good manner, in a good quality. When you consider about, as always the government says, the business community is the backbone of the economy and so on and so on, the business community will pay a tax if and only if the business community uses its time in a very well manner. The value of time will be considered when we use the digital ID system. It means we can do everything with these systems. So we, as a business community representative, we see this project, this program, in a very big project. The other thing, especially for the future cases, we do hope, according to the plan of the Digital ID program, it will be end up to 2018. But every year when we consider about 12 million ID card registered, so in the coming times for the trade license registration, Ministry of Revenue, Logistics, Customs, banking, loan service, insurance service, and so on, all these services, in order to reach with these services, and also with regional regional governments, cities, and Warada and Kabalis, we should make up in a good plan. So the business community should work with the ID program officers so that in order to achieve the targeted plan, I think. Thank you very much.
Great. Considering how diverse the country is, the nation is, you have different regions, according to historically we have different parts of society speaks different language. For this program to be a success, it has to be inclusive. Basically, it has to. So Ibrahim, if you can touch up on that, how can we achieve this inclusiveness and you kind of brought a wonderful example by mentioning the business community requires and needs services from regional governments, from government in general, whether they are in regions or not. So the business community can be a catalyst to an adoption of digital ID, but how can we achieve a fair, very inclusive digital ID program?
Inclusivity by definition, it's one of the main principles of any identity system. So it has to be enshrined into the way the system is designed. So we say design for change from the beginning. But let's unpack what it actually means, inclusivity. What is an inclusive system? There's two parts to it. The first one is that if your system is inclusive, if your national ID system is inclusive, it has to be designed in such a way that it ensures universal access for registration from birth to death. Yeah? And it has to be free from any kind of discrimination in that registration process. That's the first definition of inclusivity. So you open the doors universally to everybody. But the second part of it is that in the process of doing that, you have to make sure that you remove all barriers for access. What are we talking about? All barriers for access. For our national ID system to be inclusive, when we remove all barriers to access, means barriers physical, barriers legal, technological, anything that prevents people from accessing that system have to be removed by design. When we were talking about this earlier in the morning, we said this design of national ID system is accessible by all, including and considering all persons of disability, all persons of concern, all persons of marginalized communities. As a result, for example, we were dealing with the other week with provision of access of identification system to refugees because they are residents in this country. So it's universally inclusive by design. We're talking about designing ID registration system, which also takes into consideration visually impaired parts of the community. We're talking about bringing identity enrollment processes closer to people who consider ID registration far away, because if your registration center is far from their domicile, it's going to be automatically excluding. So you have to have ID systems which are closer to the community and the residents. Hence why the National ID Program of Ethiopia is working with relying parties to make sure that you actually bring the registration process closer to where the people are at all stages. That will enable it to become more inclusive.
Okay. Thank you very much. Just considering the amount of time that we have left, but I want to make sure that some of the subjects are addressed. So if you can, make our conversation a little bit brief. Now, Rahul, let me come to you. When it comes to country ownership, sustainability of the system, Ethiopia is not an island. Ethiopia is transitioning towards the eGov framework. Give us some of your practical examples. Rahul, I'm so sorry. Sorry about that. I'll come back to you on Mosip. Apologize, Rahul. So from your experience, this foundational role the government could have when it comes to system ownership and sustainability, scalability.
So maybe let me just step back and take, and like Naga was mentioning, the Indian example, because I think we've had the privilege of walking a 10-year journey, and I think there are clearly learnings for many, including the work that is happening again back in India. So I think what really emerged out of it was from the foundation ID being one of the elements of what now we've popularly called the India stack, which really is 3 layers of what got built out over the last 10 years. So, it wasn't one big bang approach. You can imagine with a population that large and so many stakeholders, it did take us a lot of convincing and a lot of naysayers to walk it. But the 3 components, the foundation ID, but the foundation ID on its own was not the real holy grail itself. The usage of it, of course, which today, if authentication is any reflection of a statistics, then the organization can claim something like 78 billion authentication using a similar foundation application like FIDA is coming up here. So that means the attraction for using the services went up to so many organizations using those services. The second and the interesting part of it was that the biggest use case which came through was payments. So the actual democratization and opening up the payments was the other big focus. And again, it's not rocket science. It was only a focus on open APIs, protocols, and what may be translated into what is called now digital public goods. So basically the greater adoption by opening it up rather than and moving away from the proprietariness. In fact, it actually gave a huge boost to some of our startups. India today very proudly talks about 70 unicorns, and a lot of them have actually utilized some of these open APIs because at a very short span of time, they had access to a very large populace. The third and maybe the very interesting part, which maybe I'll spend a minute on, it was about data empowerment. So if all this information is available, organizations use it for their own use, but how can individuals use it? And the third level was really focused on empowering the individual with what can be used for his own betterment, and the focus was consent-based architecture. So really allowing what data he wants to use with other organizations. But happy to add.
Okay. I'm going to come back to that.
Sure.
With asking for a little bit more clarity, elaboration. Now, when it comes to localization, this is a topic I want you to sort of look into it. For sustainability, adaptability, building local capacity and skill set for system resilience and system sustainability, what kind of contribution would it have?
thanks, President. All right, so we discussed a lot about digital ID being a foundation really for everything, right, across sectors. So if we're gonna build a system that's gonna have all these functional systems that depend on it, it better be sustainable, right? We all agree on that. So we go backwards to that, and then want to make sure that we want to bring in a system. It doesn't have to be locally developed, but it has to be a minimum locally maintained and sustained, right? So in our particular case, I think this applies for all of it. Just like we don't bring vehicles that we know don't work in Ethiopia or in Africa, we don't want to bring in systems that we know we cannot sustain ourselves within our local communities and our people. So the very first point is selection, right? We want to make the right selection up front, because once you've made a commitment, something as large, you're not going to be able to backtrack. So we want to give that a great deal of focus. And the second important thing is to make sure that we have local skill sets. If you don't have those local systems, we have to be able to build it. And I feel very strongly that this has to happen day one, right? We don't want to go with the promise of transition after it's done. We want to make sure that our local communities, both the private sector, professionals, whether they're software developers, program managers, business analysts, all of them, policy people and so on, are involved from the very beginning. And I think as we envision this system in the country, we're taking that perspective quite seriously. And the other thing I want to really stress about is when we think about localization, we think of it from the country perspective, but I think we also have to look at it from within the country, right? So the teams within the national ID system, whether they're involved in the enrollment or the technology aspect and the policy aspect, have to look like the country. And that includes, obviously, the most obvious is gender. But even in a country as diverse as Ethiopia, we want to make sure that we have people that represent every corner of the country. So when we go and deploy the system, they accept it as if it's their own. So we have to put in that perspective as well. In terms of data governance, I really appreciate Ibrahim mentioning that. We also want to make sure that that data stays within the country. So we are very happy to see infrastructure being built in Ethiopia that's local. Again, that does not mean we don't use outside systems. Again, the game is, can we maintain it? Can we sustain it locally? It doesn't necessarily mean we're not going to have a system that we don't build ourselves. So having said that, how do you measure localization? For me, localization means something that you can sustain on your own. So in our case, my personal wish, this is me just talking, is that we are able to provide authentication services internally and hopefully have some revenue generation that come from the ID systems that support the functional agencies as well as the national ID program itself.
Okay. Now let's come to Naga on since national ID, the digital ID program adapts MOSIP. Is it going to, first of all, what is it? Just tell us briefly what it does. Is it an open source? Does it adhere to global good? Eventually, how likely is it that it could stop being an open source? How do we build trust and reliability on that system?
This is a fantastic question. First, let me say what are the guiding principles MOSIP took when we developed MOSIP as an open source software. All of us know that MOSIP is predominantly the core functionality, and you have a lot of surrounding systems that can piggyback on MOSIP, and then which makes it as a full-fledged system. We made sure that from day one, when we built MOSIP, that all the components used in the MOSIP are open source, so that there is no vendor lock-in, per se. Second of all, we know that any system cannot be just taken and put it as it is. There will be definitely customization required, because countries will need to do their own customization. So to enable that, we don't want the countries to touch the core code as such. So we gave adapters as part of the core code, whereby without touching the core, they will be able to do their customizations using the adapters, right? The third point is we also ensure that all the biometric data that gets stored in MOSIP gets stored in the international formats, so that there is an option that today you are using an X biometric kit. If you're not happy, you want to move to a different one, you still have an option to use a different one, but still the old data that has been captured still gets usable. So these are the few mechanisms MOSIP has really enabled it. Now coming to the real question, right? I mean, can it go haywire? Can it go out of open source? Yes, it can. So how do you really enforce it, right? For example, let me take an example, the customization part which I was talking about. There might be a scenario where the customization code might be written in a proprietary one, right? So sufficient governance and contracts needs to be put in place so that these kind of things gets monitored at a regular level so that it doesn't go out of, it goes into a vendor lock-in situation. For example, even, for example, take ABIS as an example. Today, you are using an XABIS, right? When there is a contract that is put in for that particular piece of software, care should be taken care that there is a provision to take the data from that particular component and put it into a different component at a later point in time if things comes to that. So two mechanisms, one is governance and others is by enforcing strict clauses in the contract so that it doesn't go out of it.
Okay, good. Now, from encouraging or promoting business, inter-Africa business, business integration, e-commerce, and what have you, Ibrahim, this is for you. What are the trends that we are observing, and how can we, Ethiopia, benefit from such activities by implementing this digital ID?
Let's take a different picture from here. Let's look at what the current status of inter-Africa integration, regional integration is all about. Now, regional integration has multiple components, but primarily we look at economic integration and then political integration. Let's look at economic integration, and core within that economic integration argument is issues related to trade. You cannot have economic integration unless you have something that integrates you as continental member states and neighbors. Now, here's the statistics for you to ponder about. Inter-Africa trade between countries in Africa contributes to 16.6% of Africa's annual GDP. Contrary to that, inter-European trade, that is trade between European countries, contributes to 69% of European GDPs annually. But there's more number of countries in Africa than Europe. Now, why did I bring that up? For Africa to actually benefit from inter-Africa trade, there is now the Continental Free Trade Agreement, what we call the AFCFTA, which Ethiopia is a signatory. And it's gaining momentum and has already been launched, and it's in effect right now. Ethiopia, as one of the major economies in the continent, has a strong role to play in trading between countries within the continent. But what are the challenges in terms of, what are the challenges that are preventing trade from happening between countries in the continent? There are many tariff-related barriers. But let's look at some non-tariff, what we call the NTBs, non-tariff trade barriers, non-tariff barriers from trade, for trade. And there are many of them, including quotas, including phytosanitary and sanitary requirements, etc. But core amongst them is what we call lengthy and burdensome unnecessary documentations that are preventing free movement of people. You cannot have people you cannot have business without people being able to move around between countries. But then also, free movement of people is also related to free movement of skills, highly skilled labor between countries in the continent for GDP to grow, production to happen, hence trade to proliferate. So allowing this movement of people requires to have identifiable identity systems that are comparable amongst each other. How are we going to do that with our Kabale Mataokia? Absolutely not. So you have to have digital ID systems in order to foster trade. By fostering trade, we're looking at creating more regional economic integration.
Thank you very much. Now let's talk about the role of a government. How can government create positive, conducive environment for the demand for digital ID to increase? Let's begin from Raul, and then let's just take 1 minute each, all the way to Mary. Okay.
I think my response would be in maybe 3 parts. One, which I was alluding to before, that I think consent-based is maybe the proliferation of the thought process, that don't force it down. And the value in the citizen's mind or the resident's mind is that because there's a creation of an ID, it becomes easier for him to get access to that service. So I think that becomes, in their mind, a pull factor rather than it being pushed upon them. Clearly, I think the integration in the government departments itself to really see those use cases where obviously to the point which Ibrahim was also making, the acute need for documentation. Can you really skip 4 steps in the process and make it far easier for it and a simplified process for them to really be incentivized to really look at it? And third, I think within the departments themselves, I think we've noticed that, like for instance, a document need, once it's authenticated at one point, it need not be sourced time and time again, and that really simplifies the process. I think that's what really could be some of the department steps of the government's initiative.
Great. Jeremy Malak.
Thank you. The government has already prepared a strategy of Digital 2025 so that to make most of its services in a digital platform. So, especially when we consider about the Digital ID program, first of all, the government officials, from the higher officials to the lords, should understand and advocate the value of the Digital ID by themselves and to the people. You know, there may be some frustrations and problems when we are going to implement this, because there are persons who are beneficial because of the country has not digital ID system until now. There are legal business community obeying the rules and regulations of the government and so on and so on. There are also other persons who are abusing all the open holes. So these persons will advocate that it's not good and so on and so on. So there must be a training program, awareness program, in different manner, audio, video, multimedia, brochures, and so on, so that what the value of digital ID is, even in the countryside, 80% of our population lives in the countryside. They should understand in a different manner with advertisement, television, radio, broadcasting, and so social media, so that to understand the value of digital ID for the prosperity of our country. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And let me come to you, Tist.
Okay. I have a feeling like you're holding the right path now, you know, including different sectors to do this thing. Because, look, when it comes to what we are doing, everybody wants to join. I mean, most of the young population want to join the platform and work, but we insist on presenting an ID or some document to, so getting this kind of ID card will give them an access to the, you know, it is beneficiary anyways. So the different sectors have benefits to their society. So if we can all together introduce this ID attached to its benefit, attached to what they are going to get out of it, it will be easy, instead of just teaching them, I mean, making it educational, only won't really get inside easily. But when it is attached to their livelihood, it will go easily. I think so.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Thank you. Apart from, I will share the information provided by my colleagues. In addition to that, creating a supportive environment, legally and technically, is a critical thing to enforce this national ID. And the other one is also the government has needs to encourage the private sector also to advocate the importance of this national ID. After being certain the infrastructure to provide the national ID for the mass is secured, it would be better to integrate the national ID, which is the foundational ID, with the different functional IDs, like the driving license. When a certain individual goes to renew the national ID, if we ask the registration of this national ID, it will have value to enforce this national ID. The major thing is just to create the value and to introduce the value to the society at large.
Okay. Now we are wrapping up. I believe we only have about 5 minutes or less. Let me just ask a general question, so answers. From your perspective, from your sector, from your participation and in a successful rollout of digital program in general, what can be done that will actually accelerate the adoption of digital ID? Two people. You want to get it? Ibrahim, okay.
A successful digital ID enrollment strongly depends upon how well you communicate what it is that it aspires to benefit the individual. Ethiopia is one of the biggest countries in the continent. We say this from not only population size, but economy size. It's one of the biggest countries that can set a pace, and it's setting a pace for other countries in the continent. So we have got to get this right. To get this right, we're setting good trajectory in its implementation. But at the same time, we also have to learn from the mistakes others have made in implementing digital ID programs. And this also lends a very good lessons learned for us not to make those mistakes now. For me, what's critical here is clear communication and public consultation. We've done it with the design of the Digital ID law, and there has been a very productive interaction and exchange regarding what the law actually means and its loopholes actually. And then in its rollout right now, we have to have clear communication of its intentions. We have to have clear consultation and sensitization of the population so that not only they buy into the idea, but they also make use of it. ID without actual utilization and its productive use is actually useless. We just don't want an ID, we want a productive ID.
Okay. Al, do you want to give a...
Thanks. So the comms is absolutely critical, so I definitely second my colleague right there. So I'm a little bullish about how Ethiopia has been adopting systems over the last few years. A lot of times people come to me and my colleagues and ask, is this likely to succeed? And I say that Ethiopia is very much fertile ground for accepting digital ID. In fact, in our country, we have the demand for IDs, right? So we're not starting from a point of resistance. We're actually starting from a point of huge acceptance for us. We can accelerate based on that. So in most cases, I think you add value by demonstrating to the public and citizens the benefit that they get. I think in terms of bringing change, hopefully there'll be a number of use cases that people can relate to personally, and then that's likely to kind of go wild after that. So in the selection of use cases within the national ID system, my hope is that to see values that people will see has benefit them personally, and they're likely to talk about it, and then it's going to go pretty exponentially. One thing I forgot to mention, I think Ethiopia is really a very ideal country, very similar to India. We have a very large base of technical skills and leadership, so we are in a position to be able to support and maintain the system that we built. That's also another value add that we can expect coming out of this national ID system.
Thank you. Mabate, just to be inclusive, yeah. And then we'll close our conversation.
Thank you. Just to be inclusive, we advocate, or we need to design different kind of products which we may utilize as a pulling factor to bring the society to register in the national ID. Now I can say that as a commercial bank of Ethiopia, it has a great strategic importance for us because we have different strategic objectives to reach or to include, or for the financial inclusion purpose. We want to stretch our services to the lower level of the society. To do that, we need to have a national ID. Even I was discussing with your Dahi, as a commercial bank, we took an initiative even to invest on some kits to accelerate the registration process. So we want to work with the National ID project to expedite, to accelerate the reality of this National ID as a country. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to say thank you very much. Please give them a round of applause. And once again, happy Digital ID Day. Thank you. Thank you very much.
ሄልዝ ዋና ስራ አስፈጻሚንና ሁሉንም ተሳታፊዎች ለጊዜያቸው እባካችሁ በድጋሚ አጨብጭበን ብናመሰግናቸው ደስ ይለናል። ቀጣዩ መርሃ ግብራችን በሁለት ተከፍለን ውይይት የምናካሂድበት ነው። በመጀመሪያው ክፍል ከዚህ ከሸራተን አዲስ ላሊበላ አዳራሽ ፊት ለፊት እንደወጣን በቀኝ በኩል ያለ አንድ አነስ ያለ ሲንዲኬት ሩም አለ። እዛ ውይይት የምታደርጉት የዚህ ዲጂታል አይዲ ተጠቃሚ አገልግሎት ሰጪ ተቋማት እናንተ በዚህኛው በኩል ባለው አዳራሽ ተገኝታችሁ ውይይታችሁን የምታደርጉ ይሆናል። እንደዚሁም ደግሞ ከሌሎች ከአቅራቢዎች በኩል ደግሞ ያሉ የዚህ የፕሪ አርኤፍፒ ሰርቪስ ፕሮቫይደሮቻችን ደግሞ ውይይታችሁን የምታካሂዱት አሸሮች ይመሯችኋል። አንደኛ ፎቅ ላይ ያለ አዳራሽ አለን። ስለዚህ እዛ አዳራሽ ውይይታችንን የምናካሂድ ይሆናል። ከዛ በኋላ ውይይቱ እንዳለቀ እዚህ ከፊት ለፊታችን ሻይ ቡና እንደዚህ ነገር አዘጋጅተን እንደገና እንጠብቃችኋለን። ከዛ በኋላ ሁላችንም እርስ በርስ ኔትወርክ የምናደርግበት እርስ በርስ የምንተዋወቅበት የምንቀራረብበት ቀጣዩን ስራችንንም ደግሞ የበለጠ የምናቀናጅበት የኔትወርኪንግ ሴሽን ይኖረናል። አሁን ይሄኛውን ክፍለ ጊዜ እንዲዘጉልንና የሚቀጥለውን ክፍለ ጊዜ በኦፊሴል እንዲጋብዙን ክቡር አቶ ዮዳሄን የፕሮጀክታችንን ኃላፊ በአክብሮት ወደዚህ እንጋብዛለን። እሳቸው ያሰናብቱናል ቡራኬ ሰጥተው።
እጅግ በጣም እናመሰግናለን። ጳውሎስ እንደነገረ ብሬክአውት ሩም 2 የሚለው የፕሪየር ኤፍፒ ዲስከሽን በቀጣይ የምናወጣቸውን የተለያዩ ኮሜርሻል የሆኑ ጥያቄዎች ከቬንደሮች ከቴክኖሎጂ አቅራቢዎች የእነሱን ጥያቄ ለመመለስ ብሬክአውት ሩም 1 የሚለው እዛ ነው የሚሆነው፣ አንደኛ ፎቅ ላይ የተባለው ማለት ነው። ብሬክአውት ሩም 2 ደግሞ እዚህ ነው። ብሬክአውት ሩም 2 ላይ እንዲሳተፉ ኤክስፔክት የምናደርገው እዚያ ያለው ማንኛውም በኢትዮጵያ ናሽናል አይዲ ኢኮሲስተም ውስጥ የሚሳተፍ አካል ሪላይንግ ፓርቲ ሊሆን ይችላል። ሪላይንግ ፓርቲ ባንኮች የመሳሰሉት ኤኒ አገልግሎት አቅራቢ ለምሳሌ ከፓናሊስት ውስጥ ጉዳዩን ኢዝ አ ጉድ ኤግዛምፕል ፕራይቬት ሴክተር ፐብሊክ ሴክተር ኤኒ ሪላይንግ ፓርቲ የዲጂታል አይዲ ኢኮሲስተም ውስጥ ገብቼ እንዴት እሰራለሁ የሚለውን አንደርስታንድ ለማድረግ የሚፈልግ ሰው ሁሉ የብሬክአውት ሩም 2 which is እዚሁ ፍሎር ላይ ያለው ላይ ጆይን አድርጉ። ከተሳሳትኩ አላወኩም። አይ ቲንክ ሻይ አሁን ነው ወይስ አሁን አለ ሻይ? አንድ 10-15 ደቂቃ ሻይ አለ። So just to reiterate, breakout room 1 is for the national ID ecosystem technology providers. So all questions you have, any discussions you want to have to understand the ecosystem, to understand the rollout, what we're going to do in the coming year, in the coming couple of years, our strategy, our technology choice, etc., will be discussed, and that would be on the first floor. But before that, there would be 10 minutes of recess and tea break, correct? So thank you very much for your time.